Hello, AP Environmental Science, and welcome back. We're going to talk about waste generation and waste disposal, just what you've always wanted to talk about, trash. So here we can see an earth mover, which is preparing solid waste for compaction, and also it's capping in a landfill. I think this photo was taken in Boise, Idaho. Polystyrene is a plastic polymer that has a high insulation value, so more commonly known as styrofoam. It is particularly useful for food packaging because it minimizes temperature change in both, food and beverages, so hot and cold things, and liquids and solids. Polystyrene is lighter, and so it insulates better, and it's also a lot less expensive than some alternatives. However, a number of years ago, polystyrene was deemed harmful to the environment. And that's because, like all plastics, it's made from a petroleum, and because it does not decompose and come apart in landfills, it can be harmful to the environment. So, in response to public sentiment, most food businesses have agreed to reduce or basically eliminate the use of polystyrene altogether. And all over the country, schools, businesses, and public institutions, they've purged their cafeterias of anything related to polystyrene, like polystyrene cups, and most of them have replaced that with disposable paper cup items. But was the elimination of polystyrene actually an environmental victory or not? I mean, it's hard to quantify the exact environmental benefits and the cost of using paper products versus the use of a polystyrene cup. For example, because a paper cup does not insulate as well as styrofoam cups, paper cups filled with hot drinks are usually too hot to hold, and so the vendors then wrap them in another cardboard band, and that becomes additional waste. So to really fully quantify the environmental cost and benefits of each type of cup, we must create a list of inputs and outputs related to their manufacturing, their use, and of course their disposal. So this input-output analysis of all energy and material is also what we call cradle to grave or life cycle analysis. When we make a list of all the materials and all the energy that's required to produce and then dispose of each type of cup, we find that it's not easy to really determine which choice is better for the environment. One study found that making a paper cup requires approximately 2 grams of petroleum along with 33 grams of wood and bark, which is also a renewable resource. But a polystyrene requires 3 grams of petroleum and non renewable material, but it also doesn't require any wood or any bark to make. So, manufacturing the paper cup requires twice as much energy and quite a bit more water if you think about it. A paper cup, of the exact same size as a polystyrene cup, is substantially heavier, which means that it also requires more energy to transport the cup, a paper cup. And of course, it depends upon where the location that it's being used and where it's being transferred to. Something else to consider is air emissions. They're different in manufacturing each types of these cups, and it's difficult to say which emissions are more harmful to the environment. So since more energy is needed to actually transport a paper cup, it's reasonable to assume that using it generates more air pollution. A paper cup is also normally used once or at most a few times, while a polystyrene cup can, at least in theory, be reused many times. However, both types of cups are usually thrown away after one use, right? I mean, that's kind of the point of them being disposable. So there's been some concern amongst some scientists, but it's not really a consensus that this polystyrene cup might leach chemicals from the plastic parts of its components, like into the actual coffee. And so if this is true, using the paper cup could possess less harmful risks to humans. Without proper disposal, the bleach used to make paper cups in a paper mill, along with small amounts associated with a byproduct like dioxin, which can basically cause harm to aquatic life. And when the water is, discharged into rivers and streams, we also have to consider the manufacturing part of the actual water, the water used to make the paper cup as well. In a landfill, the paper cup will degrade and eventually produce this methane gas, right? While the polystyrene cup, because it's made from inert materials, it'll basically remain there for a very, very long time. So we weigh out these factors, and one study concluded that a polystyrene cup is more desirable than a paper cup if we're talking about one-time use. Critics of that study felt that the author did not really consider the toxicity or the emissions from actually making polystyrene itself. So the exposure of workers to those emissions and the impact of both cups on global carbon dioxide emissions, or the possibility of making the cup from materials other than petroleum or paper, were also not considered. But today, there is still no definite answer as to which is better, and what is the paper cup or the polystyrene cup going to cause less harmful effects to the environment. These types of studies, they illustrate that analyzing the environmental effects of the products that we use is simply very complex, and it involves a whole synthesis of many aspects of environmental studies. So not only does it include science, ethics, and social judgment, but it's also part of a system-based understanding of how we generate waste and how we reduce waste and how we dispose of it. There is this widespread agreement that the paper and styrofoam are not the only options. And so things like reusable mugs and, they have the possibility that should be brought into consideration. I mean, there's a whole different life cycle that generates inputs and outputs when it comes to manufacturing and, of course, energy consumption, as well as the water and other resources that we need in order to clean them and use them time and time again. So these are all things to keep in mind as we move on to your lesson about really it's only humans that generate waste.